A 10-year-old that acts like a 10-year-old is fine. A 15-year-old that acts like a 10-year-old is not fine. A 20-year-old that acts like a 10-year-old is now officially an obnoxious human being. And the older you get, the more people are like, I do not want to spend any time around somebody who's like a grown-ass adult willing to throw a temper tantrum, trying to get approval. So how does one do self-parenting?
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So on the last episode, we talked about complexes.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of a complex conversation, I would say, about complexes on the last episode. And, how to make personality types therapeutic, talking about complexes. I want to continue the conversation and bleed over into some other material that's related, but not the exact same thing. And we want to talk about today a little bit about, we've always said this soundbite, Antonia, for all of Personality Hacker. We've said, grow your co-pilot. Now, if you don't know what that means, because maybe this is the first episode you're listening to, we use a car model to understand how our minds are wired, how we learn information and make decisions. And we just use a 4-passenger car. There's a driver and a co-pilot, and these are the strengths that you have. And then there's a metaphorical 10-year-old or a 3-year-old sitting in the backseat of the car of your cognition, that less sophisticated, less certain about themselves. And so we use this to kind of illustrate how your personality is wired. There's strong parts of you, and then there's parts that are more challenging, you're uncertain about. And there's a whole shadow element too. We don't talk about with people that are starting out, but we just start with those first 4 in that car model framework. And the driver and the co-pilot, and we always say, grow your co-pilot. It's the biggest bang for your buck. It's the best thing to do. If you want to activate your personality type, if you want to understand how you're wired and really make it come alive, work on that. Yeah.
Develop the co-pilot.
Develop the co-pilot. So what does that actually mean, really, when we do that soundbite? We've talked about this in other episodes. We want to just go into this again and come at it from the angle of more the therapeutic angle, because that's what we started in the last episode. We're just slicing this a different direction. And if you need to type, if you go to Personality Hacker and you go to personalityhacker.com/car model, it'll explain how this framework works. You can follow along today as we unpack this together. So when we say grow the co-pilot, develop the co-pilot, Antonia, it's the soundbite that leads us into archetypical work in our lives. There's these archetypes. We mentioned this on the last podcast. We've talked about this a lot. Or we have an entire program, the Personality Life Path Mentorship, that goes into archetypes in our lives and our personality's relation to them and our shadow. But when we talk about grow the co-pilot and we're talking about archetypes, what do we mean by that? Let's start there. And I was going to share a story, but I'm going to wait to share my story in just a few minutes. Let's start with the definition of that, or unpacking of that.
Yeah.
What archetype lives with the co-pilot? What shares the occupancy there?
Yeah. So when we say develop the co-pilot, that is an accessible, soundbitey sentence that effectively is encouraging people to, whether they know it or not, to start the process of self-parenting. Now, self-parenting has become a bit of a buzzword in therapeutic circles over the last 20 years, I would say, in particular. And when we talk about this work, we almost always get comments that people say, this sounds like internal family systems. And it's not that far off. It's kind of a similar or an adjacent concept. I think the work is very similar. And the reason why we say develop the co-pilot is that when a person starts paying attention to that co-pilot function, or in technical terms, in personality type models, the technical term is your auxiliary cognitive function. And when a person starts putting attention there, there's there's certain energies that are associated with each of our preferred cognitive functions. And while it's not a one-to-one, when we work on a certain function, it tends to activate an archetypal energy. And in the co-pilot or the auxiliary, the energy that gets activated instinctively is the parental energy. So each of us has a bunch of archetypes inside of us, and they're all looking for opportunities to become activated. Yeah. Our first function, our driver or dominant function, is associated with a hero energy. So whenever we use that, we have a tendency to activate our heroic archetype. So what does that mean? Well, that means that when we're in our first function, particularly to problem solve, we just kind of assume that it's going to work out. Just
Yeah.
like the hero, I mean, sometimes the hero dies, but very rarely. Like, we just sort of assume that it's all going to work out, that we're,
It'll work out, and people will recognize it and give us the glory for it.
yeah,
Right? They'll celebrate it because it was so clear how this worked out.
right, exactly. And yeah, why wouldn't we have villagers throwing roses at us when we ride in on the steed, right? That's what happens. So when we use our first function, we just assume that we're going to be, like you said, we're gonna solve the problem. It's all gonna work out, and we're going to be recognized for it. The associated energy for our second function is a parental energy. And another relevant piece of information, particularly for this podcast, is that our 10-year-old or tertiary function, when we activate that function, or excuse me, when we start using that function, it tends to be associated and activate an eternal child energy. So when we say develop the co-pilot, we're basically saying activate your parental energy.
I have a memory of being so my parents used to run, well, they still run a youth organization. They used to have in this youth organization like a drama team that would go out and perform different places. And I remember maybe 15 activating some of my leadership qualities, and I was starting to direct some of the other students that were a little younger than me to start doing work. I was stepping out of doing the work directly, and I was trying to do some management and leadership.
Delegate,
yeah. And I was kind of proud of how I was doing that. I was organizing things, and it looked like things were working. And I remember my father, I mentioned him in the last podcast, fathers influence our lives more than we realize, pulled me aside. He said, listen, you can't do that. You have to go out and do that work directly. You can't just delegate, be a straw boss with your hands in your pockets, commanding everybody all the time. You need to go and do it directly, which, maybe for his personality type, he has ISFP preferences. It is more the way he does it, more direct action, where I'm trying to activate that extroverted thinking, effectiveness, 10-year-old that I have. I have ENFP preferences. And that's basically what I see. I want to showcase this quality. I want to show probably even him as my actual parent how good I'm at this. At 15, I'm like, I want to be approved of it. This is more childlike, eternal child energy I'm trying to bring. And I got a big taco slapped out of my hand in that moment. Oh man, not only did I not do the right thing, I did the wrong thing. It was the exact opposite thing I should be doing, in this situation. Now, years later, I'm not caught up in this. It's not a problem or anything. It's just, I remember this clearly. I got the message that that's not okay from an actual parent who used my co-pilot as their dominant preferred function. That was my father's heroic energy. So I got the message that from a parental energy, this is not okay to act like this. Change your behavior. And I did. I backed off of it. And I couldn't hold it off forever because I think I've got natural kind of, I want to take charge energy. So it came back around, but that was deeply painful in that moment. And I realized I didn't have enough self-parenting energy in me to do anything about that. I had no way of going, well, what do I really feel about that? Or how do I think about this? I was just like, okay, dad said this. I guess it's true because I'm in that eternal child energy. In a way, we kind of do that even without a parent. I mean, that's very clear to see with a parent, right? A father or a mother doing that with us, or even an older sibling or somebody that's really influential in our life that has a lot of influence over us. But I think society, the world, just energies out there, our normal lived experience makes it so like we don't always look to our parental energy inside of ourselves to do so. We're looking to the outside world to kind of help. Often when we go to that parental energy, we're using it on behalf of others, not for ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's where the change. So developing the co-pilot also means, where are you directing the activity? It's not just about develop it, but develop it means you're probably already using it. If this is your auxiliary or co-pilot, you're using it a lot. But are you using it to self-parent? Mm-hmm. So it's directional too. It's not just the skills you build. It's also the direction you attune it or point it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think that's why we continue to make that statement, develop the co-pilot, even if a person thinks that they're quote unquote good with the function. It's not about proficiency with the function. It's about how mature it is and whether or not you've learned to take the steps that you just mentioned. The first step being it's going to automatically and instinctively activate a parental energy, which you will instinctively use on behalf of others.
Yeah.
But if you continue to develop it, you will eventually realize that this is very powerful to use on the self.
Yeah.
So developing the co-pilot is going through the process of first becoming better and more proficient at the function, then using it to parent others, and then eventually using it to parent the self. And I think your story was perfect because it's not just parenting the self, it's specifically parenting the eternal child energy.
Yeah.
That's really what we're looking for. And the reason why is our eternal child energy tends to be the host of a lot of our neurotic tendencies. You just mentioned why. We're seeking approval from the outside world for that eternal child energy, and we can't help it. And if you've listened to the podcast faithfully, you'll have heard us mention some of these concepts, but we wanted to contextualize it specifically in terms of using type as a therapeutic model, because this is one of the highest leverage therapeutic aspects. From my perspective, there's like a handful, there's like half a dozen ways that type can be really used as a therapeutic model. We already talked about Jungian complexes and using it to help unravel some unprocessed material that we might have both in our awareness, but especially in our shadow. Another one we aren't going to mention that it really in this podcast is the integration of the inferior function, or helping find whole self, and that's like its own topic. But in terms of work that is, as mentioned, adjacent to things like internal family systems, recognizing that you have an access point here, that you have almost a defined way of understanding your parental energy and a defined way of understanding what your eternal child energy is going to be, turns this whole concept of self-parenting into a very almost like a paint by numbers tool. It's like, oh, this is how I do it. It's and once we start going down that road, stories like what you talk about really start to come to mind.
I have another story too. I think that illustrates this a little bit too. I think we also need to, so if you're listening or watching right now, think in terms of catching yourself how you're already sort of attempting to do this, but you're kind of hijacking it or you're making it weird. So we noticed a pattern. This is a couple of years ago, and we've talked about it on the podcast, but I'll just mention it again here because I think it's relevant, where I would be feeling, I just mentioned the last podcast, I have like this anxiety around time sometimes. So I'd be feeling a little bit of an anxious energy. And I remember, we unpacked this, what was going on. So I'm just going to say what the mechanism was. It took us a while to figure what was happening, at least for me to figure out what was happening. I'd feel an anxious energy. I would find you. I would try to get you into the same emotional, or it may be not just anxiousness, it could be anger or whatever emotion I'm experiencing. I'd try to get you into that state. Unconsciously. I didn't know I was doing it. Well, I think I knew I was getting you there, but I didn't know why I was doing it. I'd get you there, and immediately I would calm down because now the emotion is in you and you're feeling it. And now I could almost be in a parental role to go, hey, Antonia, don't feel that way. It'll be okay. You don't have to be anxious about this. I think it was my attempt to like do this weird workaround by projecting the eternal child work or whatever I needed, the anxiety, all the emotional stuff onto something else or somebody else. And now I can step into the parent and come in and save the day, or be the adult in the room that can help you, Antonia, dealing with all of this crazy energy running inside of you. And when you called me on it, and we kind of figured this out, you're like, hey, I think this is happening. I'm like, oh, okay. And it took a while for me to realize it, why I was doing it, accept I was doing it, and then do something about it. I don't think I do it as much. Or if I do, I try to get a hold of it.
Oh no, I mean, as soon as we realized it, you got to work on mitigating it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think maybe this is what's happening for like somebody that's ENTP preferences, running around on YouTube, debating and arguing with everybody, right? It's almost in a way, I want to get the thought out there, get the debate going, then I can kind of like step in a more mature way. We push it out of ourselves, and then we try to be the better person in the dynamic that can help solve it for the problem we just created.
Well, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's an attempt to self-parent, but we're almost using somebody else as our foil.
Yeah. And so I'm sure I could go through all the types and try to find a connection point. I just did 2, ENTP, ENFP, but I'm sure like there's versions of this other places where maybe an INFJ tries to fix everybody else's relationships because, you know, they really wish they could parent theirs or something, or whatever it might be, right? They have the self-parenting is projected outward. I think we all are doing this in one way or another. That was just my particular example of it.
For sure. Dr. John Beebe calls the auxiliary and tertiary, or what in the car model we would call the co-pilot and the 10-year-old. He calls it the axis of relating to others.
Yeah.
Meaning that we instinctively use those two functions in our relationships with other people. So when the work is in-house, when we actually need to be working on ourselves with these functions, it's totally unsurprising that we would create these like workarounds where we would project it onto other people and use them as our way of understanding the self with it. And so developing the co-pilot is just getting rid of the middleman. like maybe I don't need to work it out on somebody else. Maybe even though it's the axis of relating to others, instinctively, it doesn't mean that that's the only way I can use those. I can definitely use them in behalf of self in the same way that our first and fourth function, our driver, 3-year-olds, or dominant, inferior, he calls that the axis of relating to self. We can still use these in behalf of other people.
Mm-hmm.
They just happen to be a little more associated with our self-identity. So a part of that, the relating to others axis, is it's part of our identity to see ourselves in relationship to other people using these functions. But that doesn't mean that we're limited there. It's just an instinct. And so I think that's actually a pretty astute observation to see yourself or to think of examples of yourself projecting it outward so that you could work it out on other people as an attempt to work it out on the self. Because it's probably actually what we're doing all the time now that I think about it.
Yeah. And I think I had to basically accept my own validation, at least for me, accept my own validation in order to be able to do that. Because what I'm attempting to do is almost like if I rope other people in, it's more valid for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're feeling an emotion, I help you, but it kind of also helps me. Then it's like I'm okay to do. I have permission to do that. But if I just tune to the self and I just soothe the self and self-parent the self, for some reason that's less valuable than for others. I don't know if that's cultural. I don't know if that's just me. I don't know if that's just that particular topic or whatever. But I think a lot of us feel this way. It almost feels like we're not allowed to
self-validate.
Self-parent, self-validate, say, oh, I can be the final word on my own experience in life.
Mm-hmm.
I have the sovereignty to be the final arbiter. I don't have to get like ratification from anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
I can just decide this and make this parenting decision. But parenting's undermined even for parents making decisions for their own actual real children in life. Like they don't feel they have permission to do that either. So of course we don't feel like we have permission for self-parenting if we don't feel we have permission to even parent our real children.
Yes. Well, I think the challenge
for whatever
is,
reason.
Yeah, we feel like everything has to be a public service. By the way, I just want to take a moment to show gratitude to you. You are so good in the podcast at coming up with examples in our real lives of the ways that things show up for you. I've always said that examples are my kryptonite. I think it's because introverted sensing or memory is my 3-year-old or inferior, and introverted feeling or authenticity is my 7th function. And so because of that, I'm always like struggling to think of examples in my own life.
Maybe you're also just perfect. I mean, that could be too. Like
that is wildly inaccurate. I bring like you're willing to offer these stories of your growth and development. I in part because you can think of them and I can't think of them, but I'm always so grateful to you for doing it because you do probably come across as somebody who has more problems than I do. And the truth is that I bring the same, if not more, toxicity to our relationship than you do, but I just don't remember any of the things I'm doing until I'm actually doing them. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's how I'm the asshole. So I just want to be grateful for, and behalf of the person watching too, is that you like bring these really grounded examples. And I'm always like very impressed and very grateful that you do that. And I wish I could remember all of the stuff that I do. I'm just like I said, I only remember it when I'm either actively working on it or I'm being reminded by watching my own terrible behavior. So I appreciate that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah. So all of that said, yeah, good. I'm glad. So all of that said, yes, I think we have to do things for the greater good all the time. It has to be some sort of public service. Like I'm not allowed to do these things for myself. And I'm not sure where we get that programming. But I 100% agree that we're just parenting in and of itself is undermined. There's entire generations of people younger than us that are like, I never want to have children. And that's fine. You don't have to. The challenge, though, is that the best way to activate parental energy, other than just, looking at a model like the 8-function model, is to actually have children. When you actually have a child, it's going to put you in, it's going to activate your parental energy.
Let's talk about why it's so powerful. because I think we can replicate it without children too, but there's children bring some automatic things you can't wiggle out of. And I think that's why it's so powerful. So if we can replicate what children bring with something else we're responsible for, we can still activate the same energy without children.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, and I also want to make it clear that I'm not saying that once you have a child, suddenly you're a good parent.
No.
It will activate parental energy, but your parental energy might be a really shitty parent. So I don't want to indicate that all parents, all people who have children are good parents now. And I agree. I think you can not
what's all this world's greatest dad mug stuff being sold in the store?
That's right.
If we all can't be the world's greatest, then why do they keep replicating these mugs?
How is there a whole shelf of them? How many greatest dads
What's
in the world
going
are
on here? Wait a minute.
What's actually happening? This is just a marketing ploy. Hey, you're getting rich off this.
I thought my kids really meant it. What? Okay.
I do have the number one mom like coffee mug that I'm pretty dubious about. Like, I don't think so. Every time I drink out of them, like I'm
in the top 100, but number one, come on.
I'm lucky if I'm in the top like 3.5 billion. I'm like, as long as I'm like the average, I'm okay. So, but yes, I agree with you that one can have good parental energy even if they don't have children.
Yeah.
In the same way that somebody can have children and have bad parental energy. So what is the key to it? Like, what are the things that what are the kinds of things that indicate to us that we are saying yes to parental energy, even if we don't actually have children?
So the ingredients to activate this or focus on it, we could talk about those, and it could be literal children or it could be metaphorical, whatever these criteria would be. And that's and the goal here is to activate this, because when we activate that parental energy, that becomes a translator for our entire personality, like that part of us. Now we can talk. We have all the parts talking to each other because it's like the part that connects it all. It's also the part that can now soothe us, help us overcome the complexes we just talked about on the last episode, processing experiences and information, all the things we have to do. There's so much here. Once we activate this energy for growth, it's like this amazing skill, it's very useful.
Yeah, it's like an unlock
for our lives. You just level up.
Yeah, absolutely. And for a lot of people, it's taking over for a job that their parents didn't do a very good job on. It's like it's self-parenting because the people who were supposed to parent you fell down on the job.
So if I want to get better, to go back to the very first story, if I want to get better as a leader, as a manager, somebody takes initiative to delegate and do projects, well, clearly my actual father, he gave me a lot of skills in those areas, but in this one where it was like the delegation of direct, project management, he wasn't able to provide that, at least at that point.
Yeah, he failed you in that one particular channel.
I had to self-parent and learn how to do that, and I'm still always learning how to do that throughout my life, because that's a channel he didn't provide. So that's one of the biggest channels that I have to tune into when I go to self-parenting.
Yes.
So as you listen or watch right now, you could probably start to create a list in your mind of, oh, I kind of missed the memo on that one from mom and dad. Ooh, I didn't get that one. These are probably ways I could probably step into self-parenting in my life. So we've got a list of things, maybe topics you got. We're going to go into criteria now. You want to say something else, and then we can connect them.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to acknowledge that actually your parents did a pretty good job. You've got really solid parents. Of all the people I know, that your parents are some of the most solid. And so it's easy to see where they failed you. You know what I mean? It's like, it's easy to see the imperfections when there's so many good things. Some people just wholesale had terrible parents.
Yeah.
It's like,
or no parents.
Or no parents. Yeah, exactly. And so for some people, self-parenting is even more crucial because they're not just trying to learn individual lessons. They're trying to learn how to be fit for life.
Yeah.
And self-parenting is absolutely crucial because they had nobody to lean on, for sure. All right. So so you were talking about what are the criteria?
Yes.
Like, how do we know that we're in parental energy? Like, what are the things that turn somebody from a person into a parent?
Yeah, we could take a real kid too, like a real actual parent, to kind of get this, and then we could just map it over to other elements.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So so I've personally brought down what parenting means into about 4 or 5 different qualifications or qualifiers that allow you to know that, no, I'm actually in parental energy, even if the thing that I'm stewarding, like the child, is a project or a business I'm running or a responsibility of some kind. Like, this is these are qualifiers, or this is what children do to you. And so you just have to sort of translate these things that actual parents have to go through into another context or situation. So the first one is you can't say no. That's the first one. That's how you know you're in parental energy. You've taken on a responsibility that you can't just ditch. And you can't say no to it because you don't feel like it. Like if a baby is crying at 1 o'clock in the morning, you can't just can kick. You can't go, oh, I'll get it in the morning. Right? No, that child's going to be screaming until you go pick it up or feed it or whatever it is that it needs at 1 o'clock in the morning. And
you're on your own. It's not like you can like call a DoorDash to handle it.
Right.
there's like no solution. You can't, there's no app for this. You have to actually go and handle the child.
Yeah, there's no service to just like go like pick up your baby and make sure it gets love. I mean, if you've got a co-parent, you can tag team, which is really nice, but somebody's getting up for the baby. So the first one is it's a responsibility that you cannot say no to, and you can't even say no incidentally in the moment. It's something that when it has a demand, you have to show up for it.
So it's not just a day-to-day not be able to say no. It's like a commitment. Mm-hmm. You're talking about commitment and attunement. Mm-hmm. Like I'm committing to this, and it's going to take a period of time. With a child, it takes, I'd argue, about 8 years before they're sort of independent, like kind of able to. I mean, it grows over time. Yeah. But around 8 to 10, they start to be able to like go pour their own orange juice and like not like break stuff and kill themselves.
Make their own cereal.
Walking in the street. You know, they can like sort of survive that way. So children change over time, but you really are committed for a long period of time, and certainly financially and logistically until they leave the home. Yep. So you're committed to this, and it's not just like an abstract commitment. Like you said, you have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the morning when the baby's crying, or the kid's sick or needs to be driven to soccer practice. Like it doesn't matter. You're on the hook for this. Yeah. There's no way out of it.
There's no way out of it.
Well, cats are like that though. Dogs and cats, so they could probably be very similar.
Not really, actually.
You can pet sit them. Is that why?
Yeah, you can give it. I mean, I know a lot of people are like, my dogs are my babies, but it's like, if you had to, you can give a dog away. I mean, somebody will adopt your dog, and
someone will never listen to our podcast ever again because you just said that.
Because I dared to suggest that you can.
So it was like, that's it. I'm never like you can never. They're my child.
Okay, well,
it's over, Antonia.
Well, then they have parental energy poured into their animals.
There you go.
But they might not be hitting the other criteria.
Okay.
The second one, they will. And the second criteria is that it's a long-term commitment, which is what you just touched on. So it's something you can't say no to. And the second one is that it's a long-term commitment. Okay. For a child, it's minimum 18 years before they're a legal adult and you can kick them out. And for most parents, they allow their children to live with them way past 18, and they're still like helping them go to college or to get set for life. And then they're still very involved in their lives, and they want to be around their grandkids if they have children. So parenting is a long-term commitment, and it is a long-term commitment to steward and foster and attune to and not be able to say no on a day-to-day basis for like almost 2 decades. So,
and you're sacrificing a lot there. Mm-hmm. Like you're saying no to a lot of things that you probably would want to say yes to. Yes. But you're deciding to double down and invest in something. Mm-hmm. So that commitment's, it's an investment of sorts. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and that leads us to criteria number 3, which is that it's bigger than you think you can handle. And this is a big part of parental energy, is that nobody believes they're ready for children. 100% of people are totally scared witless when they have a kid. They're like, "Oh, I'm gonna screw it up," and then there's those people who are just imagined having a child so they could like put them in cute outfits, and then those people are like even more depressed than everybody else and even more scared. So, the third criteria to parental energy is that you've chosen something that feels bigger than your ability to handle, but you still have to do it, right? You still have to show up. So,
it almost feels like it's your incompetence is reflected back to you, your lack of skill, your unpreparedness, your uncertainty. You have to face this every day. Yep. And with real children, as they grow and change, like just when I figure Piper out, she goes and changes on me. I'm like, crap, I just learned how to like manage you at 11. Now you're 12 and you're going to be 13 soon. So it always keeps updating. I'm constantly facing uncertainty. I've never raised a daughter before. She's on the she's almost 13. I'm like, what's this going to be like? I have no idea. I'm kind of nervous about it. Yeah. It's bigger than I think I can handle. and I can't get out of it.
Yep.
I mean, I don't want to get out of it, but,
Yeah.
but I can't get out of it either.
Yes. Okay. So you don't want to get out of it leads us to criteria number 4, which is that it is intrinsically rewarding, and don't expect gratitude. So
it has to be rewarding for its own sake.
You got it.
The process is the reward.
Mm-hmm.
The doing it is the thing. It's not the result of doing it. It's the doing it.
That's right. Exactly. So,
so if I can meet those 4 criteria in something that's not kids, that could also activate parental energy then, is what we're saying.
Yeah, people starting businesses frequently activates parental energy. A career track can do so. Taking on a dharmic purpose can do so.
Adopting pets wouldn't count, or it can, but it's a little bit...
It can. Yeah.
But it's not one you mentioned. And a lot of people identify pets with almost like their children. So wouldn't that even be more so than a career, because their actual lives are dependent on you? Or a career, it's like, well, I went bankrupt, or I didn't have that job.
Yeah. So dogs are long-term commitments of anywhere between 10 and 15 years. So that's, that is long-term. But most of the time, dogs are much, much, much easier to deal with. Like, if they've got special needs and you have to be there all the time, and maybe they have, maybe they've got health issues and you have to be feeding them all the time or giving them medicine, administering medicine or something, that could be something very similar. And
so you have to almost feel trapped by it.
Yeah, basically.
Like day-to-day trapped.
Mm-hmm.
Not like I'm responsible for this dog and I have with a dog sitter while I'm traveling for 3 months and I'll see him again, or I travel with my dog. It has to be almost like the demands of it are almost relentless.
It's a sense of sort of ascended responsibility.
So a business, I'm responsible for paying my employees. I can't that's relentless. Every day, every week, you have to make the numbers. You have to make the sales. You're responsible to this. You got to turn in the payroll. You've got to keep your employees happy. So it's like this vigilance that you have to have.
Right.
Vigilance may be a good lever to look at.
Yeah. And to be fair, it's why people don't want to have kids. It's like one of the number one stated reasons. It's like, I want my freedom.
Yeah.
So that's fine, but freedom is not parental.
It's eternal child.
Mm-hmm. It's eternal child energy.
So you're basically saying, I want to stay eternal child forever.
Yes.
Or a longer period of time.
Yes.
And I know that having children, actually having children, is going to kill that immediately and force me into my parental energy, force me to be responsible, stay home instead of going out on Friday night.
Yep.
Vigilant constantly.
Yeah. It's extending your adolescence, which is a totally fine thing to do. It just makes self-parenting very difficult. And self-parenting means that you have a sense of responsibility to yourself in the same way that you would have a sense of responsibility to a child. And if you've never tapped into that level of responsibility, then self-responsibility is a hard concept to wrap your head around, because you need to treat yourself in a similar way than you would treat a child. You are responsible to yourself. This is a long-term commitment. This is something that when you have a need, when you have something that comes up for you, you should not be kicking the can, right? It's like, if you realize that you have trauma, it's kind of your job to start working on trauma. If you realize that you're neglecting your health, it's your job to work on your health. I mean, right now, my health is a mess, right? I had a really stressful year last year. Last year, we poured a lot of time and attention on the company for a million different reasons. And I just sort of watched myself, how my health just deteriorate and get worse. My sleep habits are terrible, gained some weight, had lots of
stress,
cortisol just going through my body. And that was a choice I made in behalf of, I prioritized family and business last year. This year, I'm prioritizing health. It's my responsibility. I got to get on this, right? I don't feel very good about it, but it's like, yep, if I keep kicking this can, because I was like, what if I just stop caring and I just don't even think about it? And I'm like, well, but I'm not showing up for myself. It's kind of like, what if I don't care about my child's diet? Mm-hmm. Right? What if I don't care about the habits she's developing in order to be fit for life? It's the same thing. If I just ignore my habits, I'm not being a very good parent. And so I need to see myself, and even if I don't think myself, I need to see it as intrinsically rewarding.
Sure.
So self-parenting is about having a long-term responsible commitment to yourself where you can't kick the can. You don't expect to thank yourself for it. It's got to be intrinsically rewarding. And I can't act like it's no big deal. And being a parent to somebody else taught me what it means to self-parent. Now, you don't have to have children to do this, but it doesn't hurt, right? It's like, and if you don't have a child, then you have to figure out some other modality to teach yourself what it looks like to not be able to say no, right? To have
Yeah.
that discipline, to have that ascended level of responsibility.
I've noticed this in our Personality Life Path mentorship program. A lot of people that are not parents that are getting older, maybe they're in their 30s, they're not interested in being a real parent, but they feel like something's missing. And I think it's this energy. It's the parental energy of feeling there. Like you said, there's an intrinsic reward of this vigilance. It doesn't seem like it at first, but as you become an actual parent and you start to parent a real child, you realize how rewarding the process is in and of itself. It's also tiring, exhausting, frustrating, all the other things, uncertain, like all the other characteristics, but it is definitely rewarding in the midst of all that. And you watch yourself overcome things. And I do watch myself scale up as a real father. And so when people come into one of our programs like PLP and they're feeling this way, a lot of times the work we'll do is to find something that can activate that, even if it's not an actual child. It can activate it and then take that activation and then translate that and then point it toward the self. Because sometimes it's hard just to do it cold turkey for the self.
It is.
It's good to use tools or activators of sorts.
Yeah, for sure. No, I do think a person can take themselves on as the project. I think a person can learn parental energy through self-parenting. It's harder to do because it's harder to wrap your head around exactly what you're saying yes to, right? Like the responsibility you're saying yes to. But I do think a person can do that. They can make themselves their project. You just have to realize, or you have to be very vigilant against allowing yourself to get sucked into eternal child energy, which is self-indulgence.
Yeah.
So you have to be self-responsible, not self-indulgent. And when you are very and when I say self-centered, I don't mean in like the pejorative way of like, oh, you're self-centered, like you only care about yourself. I mean, when you center on the self, which I think is a very important thing to do at times, if you choose to make yourself the subject of your parental energy, if you choose to self-parent, you have to be very vigilant to not let it slip into indulgence and then truly be self-centered. And it's all about you and what you get to do.
Do you suspect, this is speculative what I'm going to ask, and maybe it's territory that you don't feel comfortable going down to. I don't know. Do you suspect this is why we have so many people that struggle with mental and emotional health issues? Because our biology has a mechanism built into it to just handle this for the majority of people. Like in the past, most people, before even the age of 20, were partnering up and having children. I mean, this is like our ancestors a long time ago. This is just like the natural order of things. And then technology and social things, we've changed a lot as humans, and we don't do our biology. We don't do the natural order of biology as much as we did. We just fell into it before. Now we have a lot of technology to skew that, right? We have birth control and we have all these other things to make our journey a little bit more tailored to us. And so, but I guess you're saying tailor it to yourself and be self-parenting. But I think there's like this natural biological, I feel like it definitely has added to the trauma of health and mental wellness, because those natural things that would just handle a lot of people aren't there. And so you have to be more proactive about it.
Yeah.
And if you're not proactive about it, you're probably going to suffer from mental and emotional health issues.
Yeah, I think we overcorrected. I mean, I do believe, and I guess this could go down a little bit the rabbit's hole of like seeing this in terms of women's issues or being a woman. But I think in order to make sure that women had a choice of whether or not they wanted to raise a family or have a career or whatever.
Yeah.
The perfect sort of middle point was the choice. But I think we went from women should, I mean, and I'm just representing like the last 100 years because I know that societies have come in and out of these kinds of fashionable ideas. But just, since like my parents were children or whatever, it went from women should choose family, that's the most noble purpose, to women should have a choice, into now the noble purpose is career and profession. And I think we need to go back to like having choice as being like the sweet spot. Now it's hard to do because now the economy has adjusted for dual income families. So it's really hard to not work as, as both parents, and God forbid, like the worst is the economic challenge of being a single parent. Like that's so difficult. But, and I know a lot of people do it, and I did
it for a short time.
What's that? Yeah.
I did it for a very short time. It's not very fun.
It's so difficult.
About 2 years. It was tough.
Yeah. But that said, I do think that like there's a lot of people who I think would be very happy being parents, that have been almost programmed into thinking that that's for some reason that's a lesser purpose in life. Like that's not noble anymore somehow. And that you're, as a woman, you're like supposed to have a career. And I still think that women should be able to choose that, because there's plenty of women who are programmed to not really be family people, like moms or whatever. Like that's just not their thing.
Yeah.
And then of course there's people who simply can't have children, even if they would want them. So I think other paths should be available. But this idea that I think we've been kind of propagandized against having children, which is a shame, because I think there's a lot of people who would really enjoy parenting. And it is built in purpose. Like, you're like, biology starts kicking on and you're like, oh, this is the thing I'm doing now. and everything gets on board. So do I believe that it adds to more neurotic tendencies? Well, actually, I do. Not just simply for that reason. I that's a commentary statement, and I may or may not be right about that. That's just my perspective and doesn't really have to mean anything.
But it was running around in eternal child energy too,
well, that's
which is
why.
doubling the problem. We're not only activating our parental, but now we're acting like a bunch of kids. It's like a big high school now. We're all part of.
And that's the thing, is that our eternal child energy tends to be where most of our neurotic tendencies come up. Not all of them, but a lot of them come up. And the reason why, and in type terms, you could see this. I mean, this is a bit of my theory, or personality hackers theory. So, I don't have a source for this. I just am pretty sure I'm right. And that is, our cognitive functions are in a descending order of certainty. That's like, to me, one of the most accurate ways to see our relationship to each of these functions is that as the functions go down in our preferred function stack, or the car model, you get less and less certain about your relationship to the function. Yeah. And so the first two functions are certain functions. We feel certain in our first function. In fact, we feel over certain. I would say overconfident in our first function, our dominant or driver. And we feel modestly certain in our co-pilot or auxiliary function. And why modestly? Well, because it's the parental energy. And how do parents feel? They feel modestly certain. I don't always feel like I'm parenting right, but I am the parent and I need to show up. So I need to have a sense of certainty. Even if I'm wrong, I've got to carry that sense of certainty, and then I need to be willing to adjust and calibrate. That's good parenting. So our parental energy function is modestly certain. But when we get to the eternal child function, the 10-year-old or tertiary function, we are now uncertain. So how do we deal with the uncertainty of that function? Well, if we instinctively use it in our relationship to other people, right? It's part of that axis of relating to others. And I'm uncertain and I'm using it instinctively in my relationship. How am I going to try to cover over a sense of uncertainty, which of course humans hate? We hate the feeling of uncertainty. What am I going to do?
I'll be excellent. I'll be amazing. I'll show you. I'll be better than anyone else that uses this energy on the planet. That's how I'll show you.
Yep.
I'll have idealism and then try to rise to it.
And then I'll look for other people's feedback and approval to help calm down my sense of uncertainty. Yeah. And I'll go, okay, it's okay. So, I mean, you could just say you're borrowing certainty from other people. You're trying to take their certainty, right? How did I do? Did I do okay? Tell me I did all right. And that creates a bunch of neurotic behaviors, especially if you're not getting that feedback. So now you start, you're dancing for your supper. Now you're trying to get a sense of certainty through other people's positive feedback to you. And if you're not getting it, you're going to start acting weird, right? You're going to be a little neurotic around it. And so if people have eternal child energy, which is one of their strongest archetypes that they're playing out because their parental energy is not activated, of course they're going to start looking neurotic, because that's where our neurotic tendencies tend to come from, is that desire for approval. And like kids, a 10-year-old that acts like a 10-year-old is fine. A 15-year-old that acts like a 10-year-old is not fine. A 20-year-old that acts like a 10-year-old is now officially an obnoxious human being. And the older you get, the more you're calling on this energy, the more people are like, I do not want to spend any time around somebody who's like a grown-ass adult willing to throw a temper tantrum, right? Or willing to act like neurotic or crazy trying to get approval. So definitely I think it's added to it.
Yeah. So I don't think we're
Sorry, that was a tangent.
We're making any I'm not making any comments on like how somebody should live their life in that way. I'm just saying I think there is a natural kicking on of that archetypical parental energy when you have an actual child. that is void right now for a lot of people for whatever reason. It might be very valid reasons and it's totally appropriate. But now we just have, what my point in that is to say, not that everyone should go have kids immediately, like go have a child right now. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But you might need to find something that can activate that energy in you because it's so useful for growth. That's all I'm saying.
And these are trends, not rules.
Absolutely.
There's always exceptions to the rules.
Yeah.
There's always somebody who's like, because somebody's going to be like, well, I don't have kids and I don't think that I have my eternal child energy, like all on
Sure.
all the time. You might totally be right? But
these are patterns, though.
They're patterns, and you probably have something in your life that you are fostering, like a parent is fostering something, right? Like you've got this equation down. It's something you can't say no to. It's a long-term commitment. It's something that feels bigger than your ability to handle, and it has intrinsic reward. If you've got something in your life that fits all those criteria, then yeah, your parental energy is activated whether you actually have children or not.
Yeah.
So let's go to the next piece of it and how type makes this a lot more accessible, and you can use it as a therapeutic tool. Our eternal child energy is associated with our 10-year-old or our tertiary function. And that means our approval seeking, our neurotic tendencies, and the thing that feels like it has this big gaping need of approval can usually be sourced in that function. Meaning that what area of life does that function focus on? So for me, it's extroverted feeling or harmony. What is extroverted feeling or harmony? It's approval. It's approval and disapproval. Mine's a lot more obvious than maybe other people's is. In terms of seeking approval, but it's like, do people like me? Do I come across obnoxious, or am I welcomed into the group or into the tribe? Do I have good rapport with other people? Am I helping getting people's needs met? Do people see me as a compassionate person? Am I creating too much drama, right? Am I a supportive person? Do I observe when people have their needs met or have needs going unmet and I'm there? And am I doing it in the right amount? Do I appear needy, right? These are all the questions. When anything that has to do with interpersonal relationships and my ability to stay in rapport with another person and to be acceptable to them and to not be creating too much drama, but also be interesting enough, like all of that territory, interpersonal relationships are going to be associated with my eternal child energy. So this is going to be the part of me that's seeking a lot of approval from the outside world. It's very direct, though. It's like really obvious, which is nice. For somebody like you with extroverted thinking or effectiveness, it's going to be more resource-based. It's going to be about making progress, about getting things done, your ability to manage your time, your ability to manage your priorities, making things happen, building a business or building something that has like a definitive project that's complete at the end. These are going to be the things for you, right? And that's associated with time and other resources. But for somebody who maybe has a, introverted sensing or memory, it's going to be about being responsible. It's going to be about, noticing important details, having an association with the norm, right? How are things usually done? What does society expect of me? It's going to be about, being responsible in those ways and remembering thoughtful details about your past experiences with other people and being somebody that other people can rely upon to be consistent, being maybe disciplined, so on and so forth. So you find the function that is in your 10-year-old or tertiary position and ask yourself, what are the kinds of things that this function would be looking for approval from other people? If it's introverted feeling or authenticity, it's being, an individual that has strong values, that is consistent with your values and really has a lot of self-knowledge. And at the same time, is maybe creative and maybe expressive in some ways. If it's introverted thinking or accuracy, it's going to be about being maybe smart or correct and accurate, or being logical, being somebody who isn't too biased, right? It's going to be about being articulate and being able to express, right? Like each one of these has a different thing that it's seeking to let itself know that it's doing a good job. So once you find that, ask yourself, how's this showing up in a bunch of neurotic ways? Right? Like, what am I looking for from other people that tell me I'm doing good here? And then ask yourself what it really needed to hear growing up, because we almost always have some wounding growing up. Our parents, even if they were solid parents, almost always sent a message to our eternal child that we were not good enough in some way. We failed. We did not show up. We were not approved of or accepted. Even if that was valid at the time, maybe we were being obnoxious. Maybe we needed our parents to correct us. But it just was at that moment when we allowed that to burn an image in our head, and it almost always has to do with that function, right? What's getting burned in our brain is usually messages around that function. And we let it burn an image in or the thought into our brain, like some sort of belief or something. And now this is something that's this you could almost call it like a black hole of approval seeking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I was just it's not a I was thinking about this time in school when I also got in trouble with this function, extroverted thinking or effectiveness. I think I mentioned it on a podcast recently. Before the age of 13, I wanted to be the 5-star general at the top of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I forget the position now, but that was my goal in life, to join the Marine Corps and become a military officer at the Pentagon, the United States military. And I remember I got started early in grade school.
Yeah.
And I handed out insignia. I would go to the local Army Navy store in the 1980s and buy these like little insignias. I'd wear like a lapel, and I'd have like general insignias, and I would have my military that I was starting to organize. And I got in big trouble for it. I was like, you can't have your other fellow students saluting you in the halls, Joel. You can't be building a military here. Like, but I'm starting on my career path early. It's a funny story, but it is. Yeah. I'm like as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, I guess I've gotten my hand slapped away a lot in this area of my life. And I bet somebody listening or watching right now, if you really track that 10-year-old for you, you probably have stories and experiences where you feel uncertain. You didn't know what you were doing, and then maybe you thought you were doing good, or you thought you were doing something positive, and then you got corrected, and you're like, oh, maybe that wasn't good. Maybe I was wrong for the very thing I thought was good, and it's hard to get a handle on, and you feel weird about it. And again, when I started to self-parent, it just cut through all of that.
Right.
Like it just your little baby child part of you, that eternal child goes, oh, okay, I have some direction now. I have some self-soothing. I've got validation. I know, thank you, parent, internally here, talking to me about this, the work that you do inside. So anyway, I was just thinking about that as you're talking, and I trailed off into that memory, and that's why I was like, didn't have a thing to say right as you said something.
No. I think that's a great example. And what's interesting about that is we get our hands slapped a lot with all of our functions.
Yes.
But what are the ones that we remember?
I don't remember my driver co-pilot much. Not as much.
Yeah, I've totally gotten my hand slapped around my intuition.
Yeah.
I don't even think about that. It's not even
I slap back. I'm like,
whatever.
Don't slap my hand. Who do you think you are?
I've had my hand slapped about my introverted feeling function, my extroverted sensing function. I mean, I'm sure I've had my hand slapped about all sorts of stuff, and I just don't even think about it. Yeah. It's not even a thing. But my goodness, every time I've had my hand slapped around extroverted or feeling or harmony, it is burned into my brain like this, like really super important memory. So yeah, absolutely. We just tend to, that's the approval seeking. So when we didn't get it, we remember. When we didn't get approval for the other stuff, that wasn't approval seeking, so we don't even think about it. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why we have so many stories around that, is because we cataloged them, we accumulated them, they're part of our narrative about who we are now. So then you just mentioned the key to the whole operation, which is this is how it becomes therapeutic. You now do self-parenting. So how does one do self-parenting? Well, if you know what your eternal child energy is wounded around, and it's almost always wounded around your 10-year-old or tertiary function and things that are related to it, then you say, how would a good parent handle this? If my parents had really shown up for me in this way, and maybe they didn't show up for you in this way because they just didn't even know, like sometimes I got bullied at school around my extroverted feeling or harmony, but it's not like I was coming home and telling my parents. It's not like they could do anything or say anything about it.
Or they were more uncertain than I was. My father, this would be even a lower access point for him. Yeah. Like, for example, he was even more uncertain, most likely, than I was.
Yes.
About this.
Yeah.
So he doesn't want me to have any more certainty than him, and he doesn't know this is happening unconsciously.
Well, I'm realizing my dad with ESTP preferences had the same function in the same position as I did. And so I remember like bemoaning having acne as a high schooler. I did not have bad acne. I was very fortunate. I just had like the tiniest little bit of acne, but not really bad at all. But my dad had terrible acne. And I remember him, after just complaining about like a pimple once, I remember him going out and spending quite a bit of money on a very expensive acne medication kit, which he did because that's what he would have wanted for his extroverted feeling of harmony, like in his, as a teenager. And I took it personally. I thought he was telling me I had terrible acne. And so his eternal child was trying to help out my eternal child, and my eternal child was getting offended because we had it, but he wasn't 100% sure what to do about it because that's what he would have wanted for himself.
Yeah.
Not realizing my acne did not require a very expensive acne medication kit. So, I mean, it's just really interesting to think about it in those terms. Anyway, so the point is we then can ask ourselves, what would a good parent do in this situation? And centering good parenting with our auxiliary or co-pilot function. So for me, that's introverted thinking or accuracy. So what does that mean? It means what is radically honest truth for me? If somebody else is rejecting me on a personal level, can I make sense of this using my thinking function so that I'm not taking it so personally? And most of the time, my introverted thinking or accuracy will go to a place where it's like, if I think about this hard enough and I do the math hard enough, I realize this is not personal at all. Because my function, my introverted thinking or accuracy, has a capacity to disassociate from myself and to not take things personally, to just look at them as they actually are, and to calibrate, to see myself as somebody who needs improvement, but isn't fatally broken. My extroverted feeling or harmony, when I get rejection, will take me to a place where I think that I'm like, I'll never be accepted. I'm just never going to be accepted by the world. My introverted thinking or accuracy says, well, first of all, that doesn't make any sense, because if you were not accepted by anybody ever, that would make you the one anomaly on the planet, because everybody's accepted by somebody, right? For the most part, very, very, very rare circumstances otherwise, but almost everybody has somebody who's accepting them. So you're not the exception to the rule. That's number one. And number two, the thing that you want to be accepted around, have you worked hard enough to earn it? Right? Like how do you want to be accepted? Like, what have you done? If you want people to accept your ideas more, have you gotten good at selling them?
Yeah.
Right? If you want somebody to think you're attractive, have you done everything you can to be as attractive as possible? Like, my introverted thinking is like, it brings me back to a place of sense making.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that it's going to be harsh. It's going to also understand the problem. It's going to say, I totally understand. Of course, extroverted feeling harmony. You're an eternal child. Of course, you're going to feel that way. And so it will like love on it and nurture it and give it a hug. And then also go, okay, but now we have to get to work if you really want the rewards that you want.
IFJs have the reverse of this.
Mm-hmm.
The thing you bring is that strength, that parenting energy of introverted thinking. Accuracy would be their eternal child 10-year-old.
Right.
It would actually be their extroverted feeling or harmony that would be the parent energy here.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you're talking about this, I'm sure maybe somebody that has IFJ preferences listens is like, oh man, those are good questions to ask. But if you started asking those for yourself, if you have those preferences, that might create a lot of uncertainty,
yes,
distress, anxiety potentially, even though you're sort of good at it too. Like you have some answers there and can disassociate. It might create this weird, like childlike energy in you. And so we all have this, and it's weird to think in terms of how just moving that position, the energy is so different there.
Yeah, an IFJ would actually do the exact opposite, because they're more likely to be uncertain in their introverted thinking or accuracy.
Yeah.
What am I doing wrong? How could I be doing more? Right? Like,
what did I say that offended that person? I gotta rehash the conversation in my head. Oh, there was a detail I'm sure I said that made them blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Obsessing about it, neurotic obsession about
Do people
this.
think I'm smart enough, et cetera, et cetera? And so then the parental energy would be extroverted feeling or harmony, which is like,
do people feel good? Are they connected? Do I feel good? Do I feel connected?
How are
people's
your
needs getting met?
relationships? That's right. Holding, nurturing, loving on, staying in rapport with self, being like forgiving, like being, like doing all this stuff extroverted feeling harmony would do for somebody else, like giving approval. Exactly. So if they ask the questions I did, it would make it way worse for them. They need to reverse it. So basically the algorithm is what is the need expressed in your eternal child that is this like gaping wound of approval seeking and all the wounding that came from that. And then how do you define what good parenting is using your auxiliary or co-pilot function? How does this function show up as a good, solid, nurturing parent? Right?
For you.
For you.
Yeah.
Even if it's introverted thinking or accuracy, it's still, I mean, like, it's in my mind, my introverted thinking is hugging my extroverted feeling. It's hugging it and giving it love in the same way that I would do with my own daughter, but at the same time, not sugarcoating anything, not letting it believe ridiculous, irrational statements, right? Like gently calibrating and going like, I love you, but you know that you're not making any sense right now. You know, it's like if you want something, you have to earn it. Right. And so yeah, you can tell yourself you're the worst person on the planet, but that doesn't make any sense because nobody could know who the worst person on the planet is. And this, by the way, this is very soothing to me because this is a place of certainty. Sure. And so I start to rest into it. So the therapeutic tool is just turning all of this energy on the self. And it's actually, I use it with my clients a lot. It's amazingly cathartic. It's an amazingly cathartic experience to have a conversation between these two parts of you and to just show up for your eternal child in this beautiful parental way.
It's not all of them, but I would say at least 50% of our PLP, Personality Life Path students and clients also, this is the work we're doing with them in that course, the group work. So that's actually what I want to encourage you to do is find access points for your parental energy. Like what's coming up for you as we talk about this. Can you identify where your eternal child, no matter what your personality type is, identify what that 10-year-old is. And if you want more information, I would recommend going over and getting a car model, an owner's manual that will go into the car model for your personality type. Or you can also just look at the car model as well on our website. But these owner manuals are designed to help you start doing these things. We actually do talk about growing the co-pilot, the growth state, balancing, that looping that happens with that eternal child looking for approval and stopping that, and then using the co-pilot to translate, setting up your life ergonomically. I think the owner's manuals for all the 16 types are the best place to start especially if you're new or just getting into this. If you're more advanced, I could make a recommendation to our Personality Life Path because I think it goes deep very fast. It's very intense. It's a really quick ride, and but it doesn't lock this. It's designed to specifically attune these things and balance these energies in your life to be able to get the results you want, to create the systems map of your life that's influenceable, to get the outcomes you want. So those are some of my recommendations. And while you're at personalityhacker.com, because that's where you have to go to do either of those things, looking into those programs, also come over below this episode and share with us how you're seeing your parental energy show up. How is your eternal child energy showing up? Do you see your eternal child showing up and needing a lot of approval, and you've mastered or at least started to tap into some of the parental energy? Are you feeling like, man, I could really use a lot more parental energy? I want to know how to activate that more. And we could ideate maybe in the comments or in a discussion. Let's get some conversation started about this. Let's make this real in our lives. Let's just stop talking about it and take it from theory and put it into practice. Activate these things. I think you can actually live a better life. I mean, it's been useful for us. We keep talking about it because we keep unlocking the usefulness of this system. Yeah. Myers-Briggs, Jungian shadow work, archetypes, like this is just so powerful with ourselves first, and then our clients and our families and the people we love. Like this is really powerful stuff. So come over to personalityhacker.com, make your voice heard, and get started on your journey.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed the podcast, you can subscribe to us on a lot of different Android platforms and on Apple Podcasts. And if you leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, I read all of those, and they're like a little boost. A little adrenaline shot to the heart that helps us keep going. You might be watching us on YouTube right now because we also have a video podcast. You can subscribe, and hit the little bell to be notified of future episodes. And you can also leave a comment on YouTube and let us know what you thought about the podcast there as well.
Yeah, my name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker Podcast.